Good evening, and welcome to another in a series of informational webinars sponsored by the National Council of Negro Women. Welcome. We are so glad that you could join us this evening. We've got a very special topic, but before we get into that, I want to urge you to visit ncnw.org or visit us on Facebook because we think that you will find that NCNW is the right organization for you to consider as a trusted source of information. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure and indeed an honor to present the president of the National Council of Negro Women. She really needs no introduction. She is known across the country and around the globe. Dr. Janetta Cole has had a storied career as museum director, college president, advisor to major corporations, and we're so fortunate to have her as our president, seventh president and chair of the board of the National Council of Negro Women. I will tell you just a short story about her, and I don't think she will mind. Not long after we started working together, I think it was in January of 2019, we had a long day. It was cold, the weather was not good, and we bounced around from place to place. And she seemed just as energetic at the end of the day as she was at the beginning. And I said, Dr. Cole, what do you consider your best gift? You have so much energy and enthusiasm. She said, stamina is the best gift the good Lord gave me. And I couldn't do anything but smile because it was absolutely true. Dr. Cole, we thank you for your energy and your enthusiasm. Please join us now, the president of the National Council of Negro Women.
Thank you, Sister Edie. And good evening, my NCNW sisters and my sisters and brothers, all who are participating in this webinar. Here we are once again, convened for a National Council of Negro Women webinar that will be brilliantly and effectively organized and moderated by our sister executive director, Attorney Janice L. Mathis. I've really been looking forward to tonight's webinar. One, because the topic is an important one and it really does interest me. Now, I'm someone who continues to struggle. I struggle to be fully woke about all of today's technology. But I'm slowly but surely getting there. However, in the process of becoming technology savvy, I continue to have concerns about how it can be used and how it is misused. I've also been looking forward to tonight's webinar because I knew that I would have an opportunity to be with tonight's featured speaker, Sister Attorney Celeste McCall. It was a joy for me to work with Celeste when she was a telecom. Excuse me, I'm going to do that again. When she was a telecom fellow at the National Council of Negro Women. Celeste, I want you to know that we continue to be grateful for the very professional and effective way that you organized and led NCNW's inaugural Girl Tech. It was a highly successful event that recognized the presence of Black women in the field of technology. And it emphasized the importance of ensuring that the tech industry is a diverse and inclusive environment for women of African descent. Tonight, we will be listening to and learning from two women of the law, Attorneys Mathis and McCall. And it will be a particular pleasure for me to listen to learn from, My millennial sister Celeste, I encourage seasoned women like myself to learn from young'uns, as I respectfully and affectionately call young women like Attorney Celeste McCall. And so, Sister Attorneys Mathis and McCall, we are ready for this webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. We do have an intriguing topic tonight. There
Yes,
is
I want
something.
to. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to say thank you so much for those kind words and that kind introduction. I am so happy to be here with the two of you. You are amazing women, and I'm so glad we get to talk about this because it's really important. So thank you for having me, both of you.
Oh, you are
Well, you're
so.
more than welcome. What we'd like to do now as people continue to log in before we introduce Celeste and the topic is to give Mr. Johannes, our wonderful communications director, an opportunity to familiarize those who don't already know, give you a refresher if you do, how to use tonight's GoToWebinar platform. Mr. Johannes?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. If you will look on your screen, you will see a menu probably to the right corner with a orange arrow. You can open up that menu and there are several things you can do. One is you can type a question and we get the questions answered. Below that are the handouts, where we'll have handouts on how to work within the webinar, but also the handout of the PowerPoint for tonight. If you have any questions, please just type them in and we can get our panelists to answer them, or we'll answer them directly privately.
Thank you for that, Mr. Johannes. And if you have any questions as we go along, raise your hand and we will get to you to try to answer your question. And we will stop along the way to take questions and have discussion. So please, this is not a lecture series. This is a conversation, and we hope that you enjoy it. There is something called facial recognition technology, FRT for short. And it is something that we are using more and more. It comes out of Silicon Valley. It's another one of those innovations that they have come up with where they can take your photograph and digitally scan it and use that scan to attempt to match you with others who look, or in some instances may not look exactly like you. There is a proposal now to use that technology to help trace the path of the COVID-19 virus. Now, we've all heard on the news, and I'm sure you followed it just like I have, that we need testing. We need more and more testing so we can know who has the virus and who does not. But in addition to testing, we need tracing. So they go, and you can do it the old-fashioned way. You can hire an army of people and you pay them to go out and interview everyone who has been in any contact with persons who are known to be positive for COVID-19. That is an expensive, time-consuming process. So the geniuses out in Silicon Valley say, oh no, we can do it quicker and cheaper. But is it better? And that's the question we want to explore tonight. We've all been dismayed to find out that African Americans and Latinos and people who are of a certain age are being much more drastically impacted by the COVID-19 virus than others. It is sad. It seems that no matter where you look in the country, you can see from this little grid that we have on the next, I think it's 2 slides away, African Americans by percentage of population. Now, you may not be able to see those numbers because they're small. In Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, African Americans make up 26% of the population, but they comprise 73% of those who have passed away from the virus. So if you just look at that map, even if you can't see the numbers, on the left, you see the percentage in the population. On the right, you see the percentage of casualties. And you see in every case except perhaps one down in Florida where it hadn't really hit yet. It hasn't reached its peak, that African Americans are being affected at the same rate as they are in the population, but everywhere else, it's 2 to 3 times more impactful. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And we won't go into all those reasons tonight, but we wanted you to have that little bit of background as we go to the next slide, because it's important for us to understand our communities are really besieged. And those of us who consider ourselves what Dr. Lowry used to call chaplains of the common good, people who enjoy speaking out for others, and hopefully we don't speak out of turn, but we consider ourselves civil rights activists and advocates for empowerment of communities of color. We have an obligation to say something. This next slide tells you one reason why we're so impacted. We've been at home since March the 13th. And I thank God every day that I have a job in a profession that allows me to work mostly from home. But do you know that only 1 in 5 African Americans have that luxury? Only 19% of African Americans have work that they can do from home. And I get a little perturbed when I hear people talking about, we're going to open up the economy. We're going to open up the economy. Well, for some folk, the economy never closed. The mailman comes every day. The gentleman who pick up the garbage come every week. The pizza man comes whenever I call him. So for some of us, the economy has never been closed. And it is those people that we have an obligation to speak out in behalf of. Let's go on. So we want the virus to be traced, but we don't want it to be done at the expense of our human rights. The right to breathe free, clean air, the right to clean water, the right to medical care when we need it, the right to a decent education, the right not to have our privacy trampled on, the right to have some things that are personal and private to us, the right to have secrets from the government that they can't intrude on everything that we do. Now, in this age of technology, we have sacrificed some privacy. You can't have 5,000 friends on Facebook and think that your life is a closed book. That is just inconsistent and unreasonable. But having said that, we as Americans, and actually as citizens of the globe, still have the right to keep some things to ourselves. There are some concerns about the automation, the use of facial recognition technology to trace the path of the virus. It could put us on a path toward blanket surveillance. Some of you have gotten traffic tickets because you went past the camera that you didn't even know was there too quickly. And then about a month later, you get a notice from the government saying you owe money because we saw you on camera speeding. Now you can try to fight them about that speeding ticket, but they got a photograph of it and they've got a photograph of your license plate. And most likely they can even zoom in and get a photograph of your little face as you go past that camera. So there doesn't leave much room for you to defend yourself. That's sort of what we call a slide into Big Brother. It operates without clear legal or regulatory framework. No state, California is working on it, but no state has a clear legal strategy for when and how we use facial recognition technology. And then how much of the law is based on a scale. How much freedom do you give up in exchange for how much security? You find it all through the law. We may want to apprehend every shoplifter, but would you do it at the point of a gun? Is shoplifting a serious enough crime that it merits getting arrested for and perhaps have your freedom or be detained? You look at the situation down in Georgia. Even if Mr. Armory had stolen something from the house that he went in to look at, he did not, but even if he had, is the penalty for that death. So we look for proportionality in the law. Is the penalty too severe for the crime that was committed or the infraction? We've already talked about the right to privacy and how we must protect it. And then if you want to go to a protest, suppose you are into Black Lives Matter, do you really want cameras there recognizing every face that's in the crowd? These are the kinds of questions that we have to wrestle with. And one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar tonight is that we need your voices to be clear and present as these debates go on. These are not debates that should occur in smoke-filled rooms or in the opulent rooms of the United States Capitol or even in state legislatures without the people having their say too. And it can lead to automation bias. We tend to think, well, if it's on the computer, it must be true. If it's on the internet, it must be factual. That's not always the case. And we shouldn't be lulled into thinking that just because it came from Silicon Valley or just because it's techie rich or just because, technology is a tool. It's not a religion. It's not a philosophy. Jesus wrote with his finger in the dirt, and some people used abacus to calculate with. And other people like us from where I'm from use drums to communicate with. It's just a tool. We cannot worship technology and think that it is infallible because it is not. And that's one of the cautionary tales about why we have to be a little bit skeptical when these new technologies, we believe in technology. We wouldn't be on GoToWebinar if we didn't think that it was appropriate. But it doesn't mean that you accept it blindly. And that's the discussion we hope to have tonight as we move to the next frame. Public policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. Whenever there is a new policy, we have to ask ourselves a set of questions. Does it really help people? Does it do what it's intended to do? Does it protect citizens? We say we believe in justice and equality. That's what our Constitution says. And I'm just foolish enough to believe that we mean it when we say it. But does a new policy promote justice and equality? Does it address structural inequities? Now, what is a structural inequity? There are some crimes that have punishments that seem to be more harsh than they need to be. We think about the crack powder disparity. That was one that's been ameliorated somewhat. Black folk, unfortunately, would sometimes use cocaine and they would use it in the crack form. Other folk would use cocaine and they would use it in the powder form. Both the same chemical compound, both had the same effect on the body, but one was punished at 100 times the number of years as the other. That's what we mean by structural inequities. We need to invest in public health infrastructure. There are communities, rural communities, Black communities, where there is no doctor, there is no hospital. Are we adopting technology that will make it easier for folk to access the healthcare system or more difficult? And then finally, there's an old saying that says, when an injury to one is an injury to all. And if anything has ever proven that, it is this pandemic. It's okay for my neighbor not to have health insurance. And I have Cadillac insurance, concierge insurance, as they say, until a pandemic comes along, because the pandemic can't read and it doesn't know what kind of insurance you have. And you become just as susceptible to that pandemic, whether you're wealthy or poor, if you come in contact with it. At this point, the real expert is here with us. She is a dear friend and a sister beloved, and somebody that I am so proud to have had just a tiny, teensy, tiny little hand in getting to know her and love her. Celeste McCall was our Tech Telecom Fellow, as Dr. Cole has already mentioned. She's a lawyer by profession, but more than that, she's a woman of deep moral fiber and concern for her people. And so she's going to take us through the rest of this presentation. And I can't wait to hear what she has to say. Celeste, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited. All the points that you've already made have been so amazing. I just want to hone in again on how the human rights concerns, and there's a PDF attached, they're all connected. From blanketed surveillance and not having a principal, legal, and regulatory framework in place, those things are connected. If we don't have a way that we are regulating how facial recognition, technology is being used, that's how it can easily be misused. Because I think the issue here is oftentimes we're not thinking about what the world will look like post-COVID-19. So if we're implementing facial recognition technology today to deal with the current pandemic, and there is no legal or regulatory framework in place, what happens when the coronavirus passes? How will this facial recognition technology be used moving forward? So that's another human rights concern that all ties into that list that was on the previous slide that we all should continue to consider. Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence isn't anything new. The governments we use in the United States and in other nations have used surveillance throughout history for a multitude of things, which this list describes. For instance, targeting immigrants for deportation, to criminalize poverty, facilitating mass incarceration, monitoring lawful protests. So Ms. Masters touched on an analogy to a Black Lives Matter protest and how facial recognition technology is often used to identify certain individuals within a crowd. In regards to the coronavirus, facial recognition technology is actually being used to kind of, it's like for temperature. So
I really do think that my background has done a lot to prepare me for this place. And
sorry if you heard that. But essentially, what facial recognition technology is being used to do now in regards to the coronavirus is basically tracking quarantine evaders. So oftentimes, if you are traveling during the coronavirus, once you get to a certain state like Texas, you have to fill out a form, and you essentially put down your name, your address, where you're staying, the name of your flight number, and they record that. You can do it electronically on your phone, or you can handwrite it. What they do is they send individuals to the address that you put on that form to check to make sure you're there. That's contact tracing without the use of facial recognition technology. But there is facial recognition technology being used by the use of cameras outside. So what happens is there is a photo database. So I know we all use social media, or a lot of us use social media, and you have a collection of photos, of selfies that you use on Facebook or Instagram. What happens is those photos are actually compiled, multiple different photos, different angles, different things, and you kind of have this profile within the database. So if there's an image of you caught on a camera surveillance, that image is then fed to the photo database to determine if you are an individual that can be identified through facial recognition technology. So that's how they're often using facial recognition technology now during COVID-19. There's also this new artificial intelligence where they're basically gauging elevated temperatures, right, and potentially infected individuals. So if you're in a crowd, they're using artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology to kind of gauge your body temperature, right? So if you have a fever and you're with a crowd of many people, that will send an alert to either the individual company that created the facial recognition technology or the government, law enforcement, who are using facial recognition technology to kind of curb the spread of the coronavirus. So not only does our government have a history of using surveillance and facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence way before this pandemic, these are ways that facial recognition technology is being implemented currently as a means to combat COVID-19. Okay. So I touched on a little bit how facial recognition technology works. This slide kind of breaks down the one-to-one versus the one-to-many method. So when it's a one-to-one method, I take, for example, a picture of myself, and I know who I am. I feed it into a database of known individuals to see if if they can specify who I am and pick me up, right? When it's one-to-many, it's a picture of someone I don't know, and because I don't know them and it's an unknown photo, when I feed into the database, I'm not sure, right, if it will match with the many photos that are already in the database, right? So that's how facial recognition technology works in the two different ways that is often being implemented. Like I said before, you have a profile. I don't think not everyone currently has a profile, but if you are active on social media, even companies keep profiles such as like social graphs, if it uses GPS tracking of like where you go and who you hang out with and what you're doing. And although we may not think, okay, so what, they know that I went down the street or that I hung out with this person before, but if they know that you go to Sprouts grocery store every Thursday at 6 o'clock, that's a huge privacy issue, because to you it's just, okay, it's just a grocery store, but it's almost tracking your habits, which we already know is being used from advertisements. You mention something, you go to a website, you research something, and the ad pops up and promulgates already. So there are some concessions that have already been made to our privacy, but when it comes to using facial recognition technology, where I'm able to identify you specifically as a person and everything about you, from where you go to what you do to who you come in contact with, not only is it your privacy that's at stake, but it's everyone else's. So it's just this kind of like slippery slope, right? If we allow this now, what does this mean 5 years from now? What does it mean 10 years from now? What does it mean in general? I want to bring up one really interesting thing that I found out, and I encourage any questions or any input, but this thing about immunity passports. So I don't know if any of you have traveled outside of the country, but there's this thing called global entry where you can take a picture of yourself, like a little selfie, or you upload your ID, and it allows you kind of like free to, you do a little questions, and it's almost like a quick passport for global entry. So now there's discussions about immunity passports, and it's basically facial recognition technology plus COVID testing. And essentially, it's a way to save people back to work. So what will happen is you upload a selfie or a photo ID to your digital profile. Then you have to actually get this antigen or antibody test, and it's essentially to confirm whether or not you're immune. If you are immune, you get this like QR code, you know, those codes where if you scan them, it'll take you to a site or take you somewhere else. You need this QR code, in order to inform everyone else that you're actually immune. So not only is that a right to privacy issue, but it's also a right to travel issue, a right to work. So if I'm not immune from COVID-19, I can't go back to work. If I'm not immune from COVID-19, then I can't travel. And I do agree. If you're sick, if you can get other people sick, there are precautions that can be in place in order to open back up the economy, in order to save getting us back to and creating this post-COVID-19 world. At what cost is always the question. What does it mean for the most vulnerable of us in this society when we put things in place that further widens that divide? But immunity passport is one way that facial recognition technology and COVID-19 are working together. I encourage you to research it and look into it. It's very fascinating how artificial intelligence and COVID-19 are kind of like mirroring together during this time. So the next slide deals with the Apple and Google collaboration. So Apple and Google have come up with this app right? It's actually pretty cool, if I do think so. But essentially, it's Bluetooth based, like a contact tracing app that's based in Bluetooth usage. So what happens is I have to choose to download the app, right? So I download the app, and if I start displaying symptoms, I self-report on the app. So if I get a cough or I get fever, I just go on the app and I'm like, boom, these are the symptoms I'm having. What the app then does is then, I'm not really sure how that happened. Let me go back to the slide. But what the app then does, after you self-report, it actually notifies everyone you come in contact with within the last 14 days. Those individuals also have to have the application downloaded on their phone. Let me see if I can find where we are. Okay, find the habits. But so everyone has to have an app. So there's some level of consent, right? I choose to download the app. I choose to self-report, right? And then knowingly self-reporting, I allow everyone that I've come in contact with within the last 14 days to also be notified that, hey, you've come in contact with someone who has COVID-19. I think, while I'm not really sure why it keeps happening, guys, I apologize, but I'm gonna just keep moving forward. I think while the app is like ingenious in a way, I think the fear really lies in, and I keep talking about this post-COVID world. What happens to all of that personal data? What do they do with it in regards to this? You can really, I don't think how invasive people understand how data can truly be as far as painting a picture of you. If they know what color you like or where you like to go or what you like to eat, like they essentially have, I mean, we're deeper and more complex as people, but that personal data is ours. I think that's the important part. And what it's used for today, how exactly will it be used tomorrow? And how do we as a society make sure that our government and these private companies that are creating and engineering this type of software are doing what they need to do to make sure that we are protected, not only as citizens, but as consumers. So the Apple Google collab, while I don't have the app, so I can't personally attest to how it works, I think that the fact that the data is stored on your phone, right? It's not stored in the central location. The fear of like all of our information being sent to one location is that it's opening the door for like state-sanctioned surveillance, right? So you do have somewhat a semblance, right? This idea of control, because it's all on your phone. Like who else has access to it other than Apple and Google who are creating it? You know, the government doesn't necessarily have access to it, but who knows what happens to your personal data after the fact? You know, it's often slowed. You know, now there's consent that needs to be had before they can sell your data, or what type of personal data they sell. But all those things are things that definitely need to be considered. So I encourage you to look up the Apple-Google collaboration, look into other apps that are and companies who are interested in really trying to combat COVID using artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology. So the next slide. Let me see if I can get it back fixed. Okay. Here's the thing about it, right? And I don't know why I keep exiting, guys, but hopefully you can still see the slide. The issue with this facial recognition technology, you know, with every great invention, there comes great risk and, you know, potential for misuse. And the problem is that the people who are engineering and creating this facial recognition technology are human. I know, I thought computers were creating it now, but human people are engineering this type of software and information. Humans are fallible. They come with human error. They come with biases. That's the issue with facial recognition technology, other than all the other human rights concerns that we've already mentioned that are major all on their own. You have this technology that in its creation stage, from the person who created it, is biased. And that's shown most likely, obviously, in non-white people, right? So if a white person is creating this facial recognition technology, they're doing the algorithm, they're telling the computer, this person looks like this person does this, It's their perception of what a Black person looks like, what a Black woman looks like, right? It's fallible. And so oftentimes the racist ideas of the creator is imprinted into the created, which is the facial recognition technology. So on this slide, you can see that a U.S. government study confirmed that most face recognition systems are racist. So you have to test those algorithms, right? And how you test those out are making sure that you are inclusive, that our world of technology is diverse, that our engineers look like us and also look like them and look like everyone else in order for facial recognition technology to even come close to being accurate. So that's a big problem with facial recognition technology. Not only that your Facebook photos and Instagram photos are going to be on this profile somewhere identifying your face, but also this bigger issue of even if they have all these pictures of your faces, the computer can still misidentify you incorrectly. So imagine being immune to COVID, but the facial recognition technology that was created by a biased engineer, a biased creator, misidentifies you as someone who is tested positive for coronavirus. Not for any other reason, not because, you came in contact with someone, just for the reason that they could not recognize your face because you were a Black woman. That alone is a huge, huge issue. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which actually talks about what I was saying about facial recognition technology and I just want to make sure you guys can feel me, and non-white faces. So this slide is almost 200 facial recognition algorithms have worse performance on non-white faces, according to a landmark study. 200 algorithms. In the field of technology, access to innovative ideas like algorithms are far and few in between. 200 is a massive amount. So if every non-white face that is misidentified by facial recognition technology is being adversely impacted by this technology, then how helpful can it be? So when we talk about, we want to implement facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence to slow the spread of COVID, it's going to help so many people. I think it's important that our government and these private companies take the time to really assess the risk and who and what communities are most at risk by inaccurate misidentification. So I'm going to move forward. And as an amazing organization, NCNW prides itself on advocating for not just women of African descent, but their families and their community. And as a woman of African descent, as a Black woman, who knows that if I was to step outside of my house right now and a camera was to pick me up, that I could be 35% more likely to be misidentified than a white man, I might think twice before leaving my house during any period of time, not only just during a pandemic. Wouldn't want to go to the grocery store, wouldn't want to do anything because I'm not really sure how is this type of surveillance being used in a post-COVID world. So right now, they're telling us this facial recognition technology is going to be used to make sure we can identify the potentially infected, to warn of those who may come into contact with someone who tested positive, and all of those very singular reasons sound like a good idea. But what if? No one's saying, well, what is this? What happens to my personal data after the coronavirus passes? What happens to those photos? How are they used? Are they going to be sold to the government? Will they be used to identify suspects in an investigation? How will my personal data be used moving forward? And so this amazing woman, Joy Buolamwini, I remember researching her when I first came to NCNW as a tech and telecom fellow, and she's doing amazing work. And that was the first time I really kind of learned and heard about algorithmic bias and algorithmic discrimination. I was kind of like, what is that? You know what I mean? And then I kind of realized that it's not really the computer. It's not the API. It's not the technology or the software in itself that is racist. We have to do something about the people behind the technology, which is why I was super excited about Girl Tech, because I was like, not only do we need to change it, but we're here. You know, like Black women in technology, it's rare, and we would love to increase that number for sure, but we're still here. Women like Joy are still there on the front lines, making sure that systems that private companies and the government are trying to push as mainstream on a massive scale, that they are not continuously disenfranchising the vulnerable of society. So I encourage you to check out Joy's gender shade study. It was really informative because I never thought of technology in that way, because I did think that computers, if I press save, it should be saved. If I Google something and it give me 13 articles, and there must only be 13 articles. And so sometimes what we do unknowingly is put technology on a pedestal and not realizing that everything has a source in the beginning. So you're only going to read in that article what that author wrote, right? You're only going to get from that technology what that engineer coded. So it's just being mindful of how these different technologies affect us and how will they impact us if they're implemented right now, when we as a society are the most in need of some type of answer, some type of change. We're going to, turn a blind eye to this being implemented and not really understanding the repercussions of that implementation. Okay, so one-to-one matching. Feel free to ask questions if I didn't really explain it that well, because sometimes I try to figure out if I'm explaining it right or not. But this one-to-one matching system and the one-to-many matching system, in and of itself, has problems, but specifically when it comes to Black women, it has the worst false positive rate. I don't know. I just feel like not only is an issue on a race level, but if the technology is supposed to work as effectively as it's telling us it's supposed to work, if we're supposed to ignore all the other human rights concerns that can be dealt with on the back end, which should never be dealt with on the back end, but if we're going to ignore all that, at least let the technology work. But if there are people within a society, especially Black women, who are constantly being misidentified by this facial recognition technology that's supposed to help us, that's supposed to save us, then it doesn't work. And those are things that we have to address before it snowballs into something that no one really wants. There's a point here, even though we're talking about COVID-19 and the coronavirus right now, it goes back to what does the post-COVID-19 world look like with facial recognition technology? And obviously, we mentioned earlier that the government has historically used surveillance to facilitate this mass incarceration, to identify suspects in an investigation, right? So if we know that this technology already misidentifies Black women at an alarming rate in comparison to their white male counterparts, or to any counterparts in that matter, I think the issue then becomes there's going to be a criminal element to this as well. You know, if the use of facial recognition technology becomes widespread by law enforcement officials, by our government for any reason, especially if it's a criminal one, Black women are going to be the most adversely affected by the use of facial recognition technology for that reason. I don't want that. I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for my sisters. I don't want that for anyone. So how do we fix this before we roll this out? That's something that clearly needs to be addressed. Again, algorithm origin matters. Where the algorithm originates, right? So who codes this technology? Who is the one sitting at their desk, putting together this code? This, if used properly, facial recognition technology could be transformative. But with anything that could be transformative, there's always this underlying, and you could feel it, you could see it where, this could go really, 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 really bad. And so it's so important for us to always question how the algorithm originated, but also to encourage algorithms to be developed by a more diverse group of people. So here you can see that algorithms developed in Asian countries produce very little difference in false positives between Asian and Caucasian faces, which makes sense. I have no problem differentiating one Black face from another. In my small-minded world, I feel like, that's common sense. But no, I'm a Black woman, and so I'm very familiar not only with just Black faces, but with Black people. So it would make sense that if I myself coded and created an algorithm based on facial recognition technology, there will be a lot less false positives for Black people in general, but especially for Black women. So always encouraging interest and entrance into STEM fields is so crucial because it's needed. You cannot be left out of the conversation or there's this really great thing. Someone's going to comment or ask a question and definitely correct me. I believe it was Shirley Chisholm, I could be wrong, about pulling up a chair to the table, a seat at the table. That's important. So I encourage anyone who is in the STEM field or knows anyone in the STEM field to definitely research this issue and definitely put a voice, not even just for Black women, but for all non-white faces that are going to be impacted by facial recognition technology. This is one-to-one matching again. So again, it just talks about the higher rate of false positive matches, not just for African American faces, but also Asian faces, by a factor of 10 or even 100. That is insane. So basically, they were able to find a match when there was no match. So they were matching people with people they were not actually a match to. How are we on that? Okay, good. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know if we have any questions.
Yes, Celeste, we do have a question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I said, yes, we do have a question. The question is, How will facial recognition work with everyone wearing masks now?
Okay, so that's actually a really great question. I actually read an article. I think there's this technology being in place, believe it or not, where they're able to recognize you even with your mask on. I want to find an article and maybe we can disseminate that somehow. But I was wondering that too. But they are trying to develop technology where it recognizes your face even with a mask on. I'm trying to figure out, are they just focusing on the eyes? I mean, the eyes are kind of the face, but that's kind of advanced, and that's kind of scary as well. But imagine if they rolled out facial recognition technology even before they developed some type of technology that can identify a face with a mask on. You know how many misidentifications there would be? I think that's even more troubling, but that's a really, really, really great question. Are there any other questions that I want to?
Not at this time. Can you repeat the lady's name on gender shades?
Repeat it where?
You referenced a young lady
Oh,
and they
Joy.
wanted
So I'll go back to the slide. This is the slide. Her name's here, and it's also in the handout. So we gave you guys a copy of the PDF, and this is slide number 12. You can go to slide 12, and it has her name. She's actually pretty awesome. So her name is Joy, and this is slide 12. So it's in the handout. And was there any other questions, or that was it?
That's it at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so I don't want to skip anything. Okay. So how are we handling facial recognition technology in the United States? You know, everybody's doing something different. I know Russia is doing this thing currently where if you have tested positive or if you come into Russia from like another country, you're mandated on this 14-day quarantine. You cannot leave your house. There's a story of this man. I think he's from Russia. He's Russian, but he came to Russia from another country, and he was mandated on a 14-day quarantine. You know, they sent somebody by the house, and that was cool. But then a few days went by. He was like, I need to take out my trash. So he literally, you know, the trash is like right there by your house. He literally stepped outside of his house, threw away the trash. Within 5 or 10 minutes, there were law enforcement officials at his house because they were alerted that a camera had picked him up evading the quarantine. I was like, wow, that is, oh no. Hello, can you guys hear me? I don't know what just happened.
We can still hear you.
Okay, well, I don't know, my computer just shut off, so I don't know if you can see me. I'm sure you can.
You froze, but we can still see you. And we can still hear you.
Okay, well, as long as you can hear me. I apologize, everyone. For whatever reason, my computer just shut down. And it's plugged up, so that's weird. Technology for you. But essentially, that's what's happening in Russia, right? So in the U.S., currently, there's so many different ways that we're developing facial recognition technology. There's so many ways that different companies like Facebook are using facial recognition technology to kind of, in their way, combat certain things. So obviously, there was an issue which NCNW definitely had a voice in about these fake accounts during the election, and how the fake accounts were basically infringing on individuals' rights to vote. So Facebook, in turn, created this facial recognition technology software to ensure that not only that there are no fake accounts, because obviously our democratic right to vote, that is essential, but that Facebook isn't by inadvertently and indirectly aiding in that type of infringement and type of work. So there are ways that facial recognition technology is being used in a more positive way. Another thing, I don't know if anyone is aware of this, of how facial recognition technology is actually being used right now during the coronavirus is Uber is using it. I don't know if anyone knew that. But Uber is essentially using facial recognition technology to make sure that the drivers are wearing masks. Okay, so before a driver can even, start a ride, accept the ride, they have to send in a selfie with their mask on. And I think both riders and drivers have to confirm that they do not have COVID and they do not have any symptoms. So Uber kind of already uses facial recognition technology. Like I said before, facial recognition technology isn't necessarily new. It's now that the coronavirus is here, using facial recognition technology on such a widespread and massive scale can lead to kind of like unaltering repercussions, and we don't want that because facial recognition technology already as it is already has so many problems with bias and discrimination. So that's one way that facial recognition technology is currently being used in the United States. So because my laptop died or whatever happened with my laptop,
I have taken the slides. You tell me where you want to be.
The next slide after the U.S. how the U.S. uses or develops facial recognition technology.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Mr. J.
Okay. You have the upside.
Oh, the upside. That's back to Facebook again. Just this upside of like it's not all bad. Like, yeah, my laptop just died and failed me. Technology. Yes, Black women are 35% more likely to be misidentified than white men. Technology. There are downsides, but there are definitely upsides to technology when it's done right, when there are safeguards in place, when we are considerate of every person's privacy interests and not just those of a few. So this slide definitely gives you a list of things for you to consider. Like, this is not an opportunity, or this isn't my way personally. I know I've been talking a lot of like bashing technology. I think it's great. I think technology is awesome. I think there's just a fear of this like slippery slope if we don't put the risk on the table, if we don't talk about the communities that are adversely impacted on this table, if we don't talk about the safeguards that are necessary right now, what will happen, not just for us, but for future generations of Black women who are dealing with this on the back end. So there's definitely upsides. There's upsides to everything. We all have technology, especially now during social distancing. Technology is the very reason we're able to convene right now and have this very important conversation. So the technology is not all bad. It's just making sure that the technology that we are using, that we already see has issues, is not just being like swept under the rug, that we're addressing it up front to make sure that these issues don't continue and that our concerns are being adequately addressed, not just by our government, but by these private companies who are making tons and tons of money from developing this type of technology.
Okay, you got a few questions if you want to answer them.
Okay, yeah.
One is, at what rate is the misidentification of Black men happening? Are there any statistics?
Ooh, that's really great. You know, I need to do more statistics for our brothers, our Black men, because the gender shade study actually, when you look up Joy's study, it actually touches on that a bit, and she does have numbers on that. That gender shade study, I will mention, I don't know if she published it in 2018, but that's when I first came across it, and it wasn't too far off. So I think Black women was 35%, and Black men were like high 20s. The only reason was because they were male. And I think white men, you know, although the coders, the engineers behind the facial recognition technology, they didn't do all that well determining a Black woman's gender. Even not only was you're misidentified for another woman, but you're actually also misidentified by your gender. So not only is it, oh, you could be this Black woman, the facial recognition technology has identified you as Sue instead of Mary, they can actually identify you as Bill instead of Mary. So that is a huge concern too. But the gender shades, I'm not even sure if Joy maybe came out with a new study or updated on this or talked about it, but it was still pretty high. Feel free to, if you do look at the study and you find a new number, let us know, because that's another very, very important conversation where the statistics are just as important.
Okay, it says people who become immune to the virus still have the chance of getting it again. How will the QR code within the immunity passport reflect those changes?
That's a really great point. I don't even know if the immunity passport, I'm sure there is some type of, listen, I think that's even scarier. And I think that's the best point in regards to immunity passports that's being made, because is this going to be recurring testing? How often will the retesting occur? You understand? Will you need to, in order for me to stay at work, do I need to take a COVID test every month, every 6 months, every 2 weeks? You know what I mean? That's a really great question. And I don't think the article that I read necessarily addressed that. Because I remember hearing about immunity passports, and I was like, that's never going to happen. I think it was in reference to like flying or traveling or something like that. But the article that I read was in regards to phasing people back to work. But that is an awesome question. I wish I had an answer, but I'm definitely going to look into that. So if you find out, please let me know. That's a really great point, and I hope they considered it. I hope they did.
Celeste, I wanted to say just a word about that, because you can't really know the answer to that question, because as far as I can tell, the medical community doesn't yet know how long the immunity lasts, if it lasts at all.
Yeah, that's I don't know. So I feel like they're retesting.
Yeah, we used to have to get booster shots because the immunity would wear off. They don't even know that yet. That's what we mean by the legal and policy framework doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that it's not. I got this thing, I go to the airport, they scan my eyes and they say, oh, it's you can skip the line and go on through. That's great. But those types of photo are your driver's license databases. If you've ever had any kind of infraction with the law, then your picture is subject to being part of that database.
Question: are there any guidelines or steps to avoid and eradicate inherent bias in facial recognition technologies?
I'm personally not aware of any guidelines in place. I think we have to understand, it's all about education, right? So as far as like educating people that, hey, people who are of a different racial and ethnic group from you, they look different, and this is how they look different, right? You could educate people. There could be guidelines in place for those type of engineers and developers. I think the most effective way is to have more Black women, more Black men, more non-white faces at the table when these algorithms are being coded, when they're being talked about, when they're being discussed. When there's a margin of error of 35%, then this is not ready to be rolled out, because we know that women, people in general who are already adversely affected by misidentifications, whether technology is involved or not, are going to be adversely affected 10 times more. So that's kind of my take on it. I don't know if Ms. Mathis has a different opinion.
Well, I don't really accept that. I do know that there is a bill pending in the legislature of the California Assembly that would permit the use of facial recognition technology in connection with COVID-19. And about 20 scientists and professors who studied this wrote a very stern letter to the California Assembly protesting that they not do it for all the reasons we're talking about tonight. Frankly, that's what spurred us to making this our topic for tonight.
Yeah, and the name of that bill is California AB 2261. If anyone wants to look it up and see what California has to say.
There's a question of, will voice recognition play a part in this as well as we move forward?
Oh, that's
Who knows?
I don't know. Yeah. That would be very interesting. I think obviously facial recognition technology is more effective for what they want to do. Only because there's already cameras in place that they may not have audio, but they can pick up faces, right? And not everyone speaks. I know that sounds dumb, but everyone has a face. So that's a lot more easier to identify. But if voice recognition technology was being used, I'm very curious to see how exactly they would implement that effectively.
Ms. Tommy Whitlow brought up something. She said a while back there was a driverless car that killed somebody because it didn't recognize that there was a person in front of them through the facial recognition software.
That's a great analogy. That sometimes technology goes faster. We got to be careful to test it and make sure that it works. You know, we're going to have these autonomous trucks and do away with all truck drivers until they find out they're not so good at avoiding collisions. And that's why we have to sometimes say slow up. As much as we want to trace the virus and there are positive applications, we do have to be cautious because once they get started, it's harder to stop them.
Right. I think it's the issue of collateral damage, right? So for these companies, like that one life, I feel like it sounds familiar, but I don't remember reading anything about it. I don't know, it impacted me. I felt like, wow, somebody lost their life, right? One life, that's a lot. That's enough. That's enough to make sure that we do what we need to do to make sure this technology is safe for everyone. So one misidentification is enough. You know what I mean? There should be no collateral damage. I mean, statistically, there may be, but really that should be the goal.
Because of the overwhelming need for tracing technology, do you all believe this issue will make its way to the voting ballot or more likely become a unilateral government decision?
So I have a quick point, and I'll let Ms. Mathis chime in if she wants. There is no principled unilateral legislation to even protect our own personal data. There's different laws, like federal laws, there's different state laws. So an idea of one unilateral legislation on facial recognition technology, that would be awesome. But as a lawyer, I'm not really sure if there will be one. I do believe like states like California and other states around this country will start drafting bills. If it has to do with COVID-19 and facial recognition technology or just facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence in general, I think that will happen. And so I would go vote and see if they put it on the ballot. That would be nice. Because that would be a democratic participation in what our state and what our federal governments are deciding for us. But I don't know if I'm very hopeful for anytime soon any one principal universal legislation for facial recognition technology.
I would just add that the European Union has attempted something like what you're describing, a universal sort of declaration of how people's private information can be used. But our Silicon Valley-based tech companies, who are obviously operate in Europe like they operate all over the world, have tenaciously fought the implementation of that regulation in Europe. And given our state's rights history, you see right now that states are scrambling to figure out how to deal with COVID, that it doesn't seem likely that there would be a federal universal solution for the United States.
Okay, currently that's all the questions. This current slide is what risks are associated with FRT.
I think we discussed a lot of those first when we talked about our human rights concerns and things of those nature. I think one of the biggest risks, which has already been mentioned, is this blanketed surveillance, which also ties in to an infringement on our privacy. And so the biggest risk, in addition to those things, which I think are a huge risk for every citizen, is obviously this technology is going to target already vulnerable groups. I don't mean to kind of repeat myself over and over again, but this often inaccurate, this often fallible, this often biased, this often discriminatory technology is going to target already vulnerable groups. And I think, like I said before, one misidentification is not okay, because misidentifying, whether it's in the criminal justice system, but eyewitness testimony, that's the lawyer in me, but all those things, one is too much. It can lead to consequences for that individual that individual did not have to experience had we did what we needed to do on the front end to make sure that this innovative, awesome, amazing technology isn't being abused or misused. So the risk is great. As a Black woman, it's great for me, knowing that I fall into the category of people who are the most likely to be misidentified.
You know, the other concern is that we say we believe in due process. And so you would think that anything that had the potential to cost you money or time or even inconvenience, you would have the right to opt out. But so far, I haven't seen any regulatory suggestion that you would have the right to say, before you take my picture, you have to get my consent. Now, of course, there are ways of getting your consent. You scroll down to the bottom of the page of a new website and they say, do you accept? Well, you haven't read all those caveats.
Yeah.
I haven't read them. I do it all the time. I want whatever it is that they're waving in front of me. And so I said, yeah, you may do whatever. And this notion that you can invade my privacy without my knowledge or my consent, I think is very important too.
Super important. Super. I don't know if there's another slide or.
We have the sources, and then we have
more sources.
And what can we do as a community?
This was something that I got from Tommy Whitlow, who's on the phone, I believe. And she told me about this Black Los Angeles Community United. They put together a whole list of demands of things that they needed to protect their community, but they did it as a group. So you had Black Lives Matter and the NAACP and the NCNW and a host of organizations coming together to demand justice. And I just think that's such a great example. Dr. Cole saw it and she said, you know, we ought to be doing that in every community in the country.
I agree. I think Ms. Mathis made a really great point earlier about collective healing. And so in order for us to achieve collective healing, there has to be collective action. Oftentimes when you get together in a community, the most important step is to educate. Most people don't know. Like, I didn't know anything about this, before Well, I did know, but okay, before 2016, I had no idea, right? Obviously, there was Facebook out, there were all these things out already, but my first kind of really touch into how technology is impacting different communities differently was at that time, and it kind of amazed me because technology continues to grow. So in order for us to heal collectively, we must act collectively, and that's taking this information, making sure that you don't just take our word for it, but you're doing research on your own, you're tapping into those sources, you're telling your sister or your friend or your cousin or your brother, you're encouraging. Sorry if that I heard a little.
You're fine. I think she's dropped out. Hello?
Well, there is a lot of information, and one of my goals for this program was so that when you start hearing this in the news, it won't be the first time that you've heard it. That there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion. After 911, there were some things that changed permanently. You never walked into an airport again past security without a ticket. There will be some things that will change permanently as a result of this pandemic. And this idea of facial recognition technology and how we allow technology to circumscribe our rights as human beings is going to be a discussion that's going to be with us for a long time. And so when you hear it being debated, you can say, oh yeah, we talked about that already at NCNW. And the more you read about it, the better understanding we will all have.
Yeah.
So are there other questions or comments?
We are out of questions at the moment, ma'am.
Well, we don't want to hold people unnecessarily. If we've gotten all that we can squeeze out of this, we will see you in a couple of weeks. I want to stop long enough to thank Celeste McCall again for her expertise and her willingness to be part of this discussion. We are so appreciative. I want to thank Ms. Green, who you don't see, but she's responsible for the artwork. And Mr. Johannes for always being there to answer our we're not so techie questions all the time. And of course, to Dr. Cole. And if you're looking for an organization that accepts all persons without initiation, no matter what your grades were, no matter what your degree was in, if you don't have a degree, I would encourage you to consider the National Council of Negro Women. Dues are only $50 a year. You can't join any sorority, and I'm in one, for $50 a year. The information is timely, it is accessible, and I encourage you to consider joining the National Council of Negro Women so we can keep having these webinars for free. And of course, we want go ahead, Celeste.
Oh, I'm sorry. I enjoy being here. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Talking about technology, it just was so very timely, and I appreciate you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't forget to visit us at www.ncnw.org, or we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. So check us out. Come back and visit us in a couple of weeks when I think we'll have a banker on tap to talk about funding your business and how to protect it during COVID. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.